So today we have a very special guest. We have Sophia Galano. She is a licensed clinical social worker and author of her new book, um, Calming Teenage Anxiety, A Parent's Guide to Helping Your Teenager Cope with Worry and Stress. And it is out October 7th. So it's very exciting. So, Sophia, thank you for being here and welcome. If you'd like to start by just telling us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what inspired you to write this book.
Okay. Thank you so much, Courtney. It's nice to be here and nice to see everyone on the Zoom. So a little bit about me. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm an LCSW. I have a master's degree from NYU, and I've had my private practice pretty much right from the get-go of graduating from graduate school. And while building my practice, I've also worked in a number of other clinical settings. So in high schools, both independent, both public. I've worked in community mental health centers, inpatient hospitals. I've worked at treatment centers. And I've always really been interested in working with teens ever since I was in graduate school, my internship. So I love this population. And really, what inspired me to write this book was, from working with the teens, of just seeing how much support is needed for the parents and how parents really benefit from tools, from skills, from techniques and ways to help their teenagers. And so many parents don't know what to do. So I write about this kind of the opening chapter of my book that I used to give a lot of talks at independent high schools in the Los Angeles area. And I would pick a different subject. So I would, gave talks on, substance use, depression. And I gave one on teenage anxiety. And I remember it was the most crowded of any of my talks. So I remember all the chairs were filled and people were standing and there were so many questions. We didn't have enough time to go over everything. And it really hit me how helpful it would be for these parents to almost have like an instruction manual of like what specific words to say, what not to say, what to do, what not to do, and just a guide to reference them, so really to go into what's, contributing to teenage anxiety, what's causing it, but really more about where do we go from there. Like we all kind of know that it's an issue, but now what? So that was really the inspiration for the book. I also wrote the book to be accessible for everyone. So I wanted the parents with the PhD to be able to pick it up and what kind of have skills and tools, but also the parent who didn't finish high school. So it's really for everyone, also for clinicians, for loved ones, for friends, but mainly like my main demographic is for the parents
Mhm.
here.
And I think you bring up good points. It's as clinicians too, we're very familiar
Mhm.
with anxiety and teenage anxiety, but sometimes I think that makes it harder for us to, describe it to parents. And we think, oh, this is how you should talk to a child with anxiety, or we sometimes assume that they know how to
Yes,
do these things. And I
yes,
think a guide for parents, and that step-by-step guide of how, like what words to use and when
yes,
to use them and how to use them can be really helpful because I think a lot of our viewers today too. Like I started working mostly with teens and adolescents because that was, again, my favorite population. And a lot of
mhm,
times you would see a lot of anxiety in them.
yes,
It can also be, and I remember some colleagues saying, oh, you want to work with teens? Like that's a tough population. I said, it's my favorite. It
yes,
still kind of is because, even though it can be such a difficult time for them, their brain development is
right.
so great at that time that we could really, with the right tools and skills, we could really turn it into like a wonderful time for them.
Yes,
Um,
yes. It's a
your book,
very pivotal time.
right, and I think your book is a great way of showing parents how to do that.
Thank
And
you.
even
Thank
though
you.
stress and worry is, common, there's
Yes,
things that we can do to help.
yes, yes,
You mentioned too that sometimes the signs for anxiety in teens can go unnoticed. Do you
yes,
mind talking a little bit more about
yes.
what we're
Yes.
seeing really in the adolescent time period?
Yes, yes. So a lot of my work with parents, first of all, is, that's where we start, is parents come to see me and they're like, first of all, I don't know, does my teen have anxiety? Like, is this a cause for concern or is this standard teenage behavior? Is this kind of like hormones, rebellion? Is it teen angst? And so many parents who are loving, well-meaning, caring parents often disregard anxiety and label it under that, teen angst, hormones, kind of natural. It's just a phase type vibe, without even realizing that something more serious is going on. So oftentimes, like, a big part of my work with parents is just, them being compassionate for themselves and non-judgmental of how natural it is to disregard teenage anxiety. Because, for anyone listening who does work with teens, we know that, or has teens, that teens are not the expert communicators. So, and that's really important for parents to remember, that a teen is not going to communicate their hardship and struggle the same way a 30, 40, 50-year-old adult is going to. It's going to come out in different ways. So what I recommend is
Well,
really.
I put on this little, well, I mean, I just put this little Zoom on. Do you need the kids' help or?
Can we
Oh,
make sure everybody is muted, please?
I think
Again.
okay. So
I would, but I'm going to Hannah's work for a ribbon cutting. I'm trying to
Wondering
support
if
her.
we can, there we go. We can try and mute
okay, you
everybody.
got it. Okay, cool. I was like, oh, someone's very excited to chat about the subject. I like it. Uh, so really what I recommend is for parents to start mindfully observing how often, to what extent a teenager is struggling. So sort of my go-to example, I list this in the book, where, like, let's say there is a teenager who is anxious before a math test. They're feeling nervous, they're feeling stressed, they're feeling worried. But they go to school, they take the test, it's okay. Okay, very standard. Understandable to feel anxious about that. If there's a teenager that refuses to go to school or has a panic attack before every math test, goes into full-on meltdown mode, throws up, that's where we're going to want to take a different approach to this. We're going to want to take a closer look. So it's really evaluating how much and to what extent. Also, again, like, how often is this happening? Is this a one-off situation, or is this happening daily, weekly, monthly? Like, we really want to take a closer look here. And oftentimes that's very empowering for parents, and just saying, like, oh, I actually have the ability to really look at this and evaluate with a very curious, non-judgmental
Mhm.
mindset. But again, easy to get confused and disregard.
What would some of those like kind of specific symptoms be in teens?
Yeah. So, and again, just to keep in mind that, it sometimes the symptoms might not look how anxiety looks for an adult. So again, there are some kind of more of the classic kind of anxious symptoms of, a teenager, first of all, like going into full on like panic attack, difficulty breathing, like, things that kind of more of, the kind of traditional anxiety might look like. But some of it also might be that like school avoidance, the conflict, appearing kind of more angry even at times, like how, I mean, that's kind of also ties more to kind of the depression there. With teens, kind of depression can manifest more as anger than even kind of sadness. But of really taking this close look of, is my teenager stressed all the time? Are they worried all the time? Of like really looking at that stress and that worry, the school avoidance, the conflict, looking, are they isolating? Are they retreating? Like, are they not hanging out with their friends anymore? Are they not enjoying the activities they used to? Like, what behaviors are changing? And it can also look different for every teen. So for some teens, it might be more of that kind of I don't want to say obvious. I don't, I think that's kind of the incorrect word, but just for the sake of this conversation, I'll say kind of maybe more overt symptoms of kind of panic. But for other teens, it might be more subtle. It might be like, I don't feel well. I don't want to go to school today. I still don't feel well. I don't want to go to school next week. I still don't feel well. I don't want to go to school next month. Like, it might be kind of more hidden or more almost like disguised.
Right. I think a lot of people realize, yes, if you're crying or if you get those somatic complaints, my stomach hurts, my headache,
Mhm.
then they think, oh, you're anxious. But what I found, and other people can chime in too if they've had this, but a lot of times with teens, it's that irritability. Or
Right.
it's the what parents would call, like, they're giving me attitude.
Yeah. The
They don't
moodiness.
do things with the family anymore. And really, it's getting the parent, like you said, to be non-judgmental and also think, okay, what's the, why behind the behaviors? We know even working with younger children, your behavior is how they communicate. And sometimes teens do that too. So if your teen is a little bit more irritable or,
Right.
shorter with you or whatever it is, maybe there's something else going on. A lot of times too, what I've seen is that when a teen is resistant to try something new,
Hmm.
it's not always because they just don't want to. It's that anxiety
Yeah,
in them,
it's scary.
how to, communicate. So to your
Hmm.
point, right, if the parent sets up, a non-judgmental way of communicating, then your
Right.
child's going to be more likely to come to you,
Yes.
and have those conversations.
Yes.
How would
Yes.
you suggest clinicians, foster that, like the empathetic and active listening and the communication in parents?
Yes, yes. So, and again, I think for us as clinicians, we're like, yeah, it's a no-brainer, like active listening, curious, inquisitive mindset. But for parents, it can feel like it goes against their instincts or as parents that most parents want to fix, like they want to provide the solutions, which is again understandable. Their child is suffering and they want to alleviate it right away. So as clinicians, we really want to help go coach and guide the parents that we're working with and teaching them that actually the active listening and seeking to learn more ultimately is fixing, like down the road. It's just more of a kind of more subtle approach to take, that to have a conversation, first of all, again, as clinicians, this might sound like another no-brainer, but of lessening any yes or no questions, like asking open-ended questions, like seeking to learn more, giving the time and space. There are, I think, like very kind of practical ways of doing this that are almost like kind of quick, easy fixes. But parents kind of just, disregard or they forget where it's like if a parent knows that they're going to be interrupted. They know that they don't have the time to have the conversation. They know that their phone's going to ring, that their other child's going to come in, that that's not the time and place to have the conversation. A lot of parents come to see me. They're like, I tried to talk to my kid about it, and she shut down. And then I'm like, well, what else was going on? It was like, oh, well, this person walked in and that person walked in and it was noisy and, she was tired from school. And I'm like, yeah, of course she don't want to talk to you about it. So there are ways to kind of modify how to have a conversation, like the time, the place, the setting. I encourage a lot of my parents that I work with to be creative with where they have their conversations with teenagers. So for adults, it can feel kind of weird to do this, or it can feel kind of like informal or too casual. But for teens, the organic conversations are so important. That's when they're going to open up to their parents, like not when they're forced to sit down like at the, table at, and have kind of this family meeting type vibe. But it's more like when they're driving together in the car or when they're walking their dog together or like they're going out for frozen yogurt or coffee or something, where it's more casual and it's going to feel weird for parents to do that. It's kind of learning to speak a new language. So a lot of the work I do with parents is just helping them also get comfortable with this and knowing that even if their teenager opens up to them for 1 minute, that's massive, and not to get, discouraged and also to revisit at a later time, I mean, and again, as clinicians, we're like, yeah, of course, don't just have one conversation and let it be the last. But sometimes, parents, again, very well-meaning parents are sort of like, well, I checked that box. I tried to talk to them. They didn't want to talk to me. It's kind of a lost cause. To kind of just revisit over time. Like, don't let one conversation be the last conversation that you have.
Right. And sometimes, right, parents will say like, oh, I tried to talk to them today and they didn't want to, and then I stopped. It's like, okay,
Right.
keep doing that because it is uncomfortable, for the teen as
Mhm.
um
Right.
what are some, and I know you do you kind of have like a holistic approach too, which I like. And sometimes in the counseling setting, I would even take clients, I'm big with ecotherapy. So we'd go outside for a walk,
Mhm.
we would
Yeah.
run. Because it's easier, like you said, than just sitting, face to face with someone talking about things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for parents, like you had some examples of, go for a drive, have that like connected time.
Mhm.
School counselors that are based, in the school. And I was that for a couple years too. Do you have any strategies on how they could better, connect with a student that it's not just sitting, in their office and it's also, it adds another layer of if the school is an anxiety source, you're in
Right.
school too. But how
Right.
can we best help, the teen in that situation?
Right, right. And I do think that some of it is dependent on the school and the resources that are available, and also the policies in place. So, when I was working in the school, counseling at the, kind of independent school, I was working at very different than the large public school I was working at. So, in terms of what we could do during sessions, where we could go, um, sometimes at the independent school, that was that we would actually like go outside, we would talk in kind of like a courtyard area when, they're obviously not when it was like during lunch or during a break, but when it was kind of quieter, or we would go for a walk, and sometimes that would actually help. Or different, I would even like kind of experiment to see like different times of day when I met with them, what would happen. That also can be kind of fascinating. But really, and again, this might feel like a reminder to the school counselors who are listening, but also to be patient, that like it also takes time. So like it's establishing that rapport with the student, so some students, I found like would come in the first time and just, spill everything, and it's like awesome, those are, great, like love it. And then there are others where it's like, even if they come in for, and again, I don't know kind of the policy and how it works with all schools, but I'd have students that would kind of drop in for 5 minutes, like each day that I was there. And then I'd have others that would come and sit for an hour once a week. So again, just noticing that there's going to be kind of different timelines too, in terms of how the teens open up, how long it takes, what it looks like for them, and just kind of staying patient with it. Again, my approach as a clinician, and this goes for, when I work with parents, is to never force anything, unless of course it's an emergency. That's going to totally different conversation and different topic. If a teen is, suicidal, that's obviously we're going to have a very different approach to that than a teen who, is experiencing some anxiety. It's going to be different, but to stay patient, not force. I mean, I think what can happen, even as clinicians, if we push too hard, we push our clients away. Like we want to kind of push them a little outside like, Courtney, we were chatting about this, that like a little outside their comfort zone, but not to the point where it's like unsafe, or, it makes them retreat even more.
Right. It has to be when, they're ready. What
Yes.
you were saying before, sometimes, parents will come to us and say, we want, fix my child, or what can we do,
Mhm.
solve this problem.
Mhm.
To your point, right, it's not really a problem that needs to be fixed. It's more of how we, communicate the resources we can give the teen,
Right.
um, and the understanding of what, anxiety is. So how would you best kind of explain that to a parent and teen going through this, for the first
Mhm.
time? Maybe they didn't realize, that I, had anxiety, or they're not familiar with, therapy and other resources. How would you best kind of approach that type of, client and parent?
Yeah, in terms of the psychoeducation piece, yes. So, and oftentimes this is really where I start with parents, where they come to a point where they realize something weird is going on. That's what they're like, something weird's going on, something unusual. My kid is not acting themselves. Like, what is that? What's behind the scenes here? So it can be helpful, for the parent to understand like what's contributing to this, like what are the factors here. And also sometimes it can help, I'm going to say, lessen the sting a little bit, because oftentimes parents come in there like, what did I do, what did I do wrong? And of course it's always important for us to, look at our part and evaluate kind of what we're doing, and I always encourage parents to do that, and also look at what is going on behind the scenes, that sometimes there are bigger factors. So we have kind of these classic causes, and this is what I share with the parents is, the things that they might have experienced in their own adolescence. So, hormones changing, genetic factors, chemical changes, so those are kind of more of those like scientific kind of medical explanations that haven't really changed significantly since they were a teenager. But then we also have all of these new kind of cultural factors that, most parents did not experience during their own adolescence, like technology and social media. Those are, there's many conversations going on around that. We could have a whole nother talk and a whole nother book about that. But then in addition to the, technology, social media, we also have, there's more stress in terms of, academics and the college admissions process that has changed significantly too. So there's all these factors going on behind the scenes that are almost like invisible on the kind of the day to day, but they're there. When the teen walks into school, all of this is there. When the teen is at home, this is there. Even if it's not being discussed right in front of them, it's happening and it's going on. So educating and informing parents is, for the clinicians listening or working with the parents, it is really helpful, because it is a reminder for them of all the anxiety. So yeah, so just as a reminder.
So you mentioned other influences that can affect anxiety, and you go through it in the book a little bit. Would you mind describing more of what you're seeing, is influencing the teens more, these days in the different categories that you set up?
Yeah. So today, and this is, because just to preface, and I mentioned this in my book, I'm not a medical doctor. So it's important to note all those medical conditions, but I'm not the expert in those areas. With the technology and the social media, that is something that I go into great detail in my book, so of seeing, and the academic piece too, so just to begin in terms of the social media and the technology, I encourage parents to reflect on their own adolescence. We do a lot of self-reflective exercises in the book of remembering what their teenage years were like and how they would feel if that was broadcast on the internet for everyone to see. If you were living in this kind of comparison trap all day, where like you just open your phone and you see all the other people that at school going through their life, but it's highlighted, it's looked a certain way. Teens start to ask, why am I not that way? It's sort of like from surface level, it's not good for anyone's self-esteem. But what I encourage, and I know maybe we'll get to this later, is really for teens to shift their social media use. I am not an advocate of prohibiting social media or the use of technology. I actually, and I get a lot of mixed feelings from people when I say that, but I actually think that approach can really backfire and cause teens to feel very controlled, and also, can often lead in the teen kind of lying or sneaking, and that's the last thing we want. So a lot of my work is telling parents, like, yes, these are factors that are contributing to it, social media, technology, but let's modify how they use these factors. Like, can we use them actually for good versus for bad? And then also keeping in mind with the academic and the collegiate competition, of, again, separate topic, but how that contributes to it and how we can modify the relationship with that. So if there are ways to kind of lessen pressure while still kind of rolling with the times, that this is what it is now. We can't go and force like all the universities to change like their policies or protocols, but of kind of accepting it and rolling with it.
hmm Right. And we might get some questions about this at the end, but I could not agree with you more with, technology and social media. And I think sometimes and not all the times, but when, parents come in, and they're of that mindset of like, okay, something's wrong, fix it. We try to look at other things to fix, first.
Right.
Sometimes the phone becomes one of those. And of course, I always say it's not necessarily what you do, but the why you do it,
Right.
the why
Right.
behind it.
Right.
Right. If we use that like cognitive, like reappraising, right? Of like, okay,
Mhm.
how can I use social media for good? How can I use
Right.
it to enhance,
Yes.
self-esteem or my
Right.
interests, my connections?
Right.
I think that's going to be much more beneficial for them, for the teens in the long run. And a lot
Yes.
of times, with anxiety, we know that, we feel more anxious when we don't have a lot of control.
Hmm.
So, right, when we have these like very strict, just like ban of everything, it's not giving the teen a lot of autonomy. And I think sometimes it can be confusing for a teen. And I would like to, know your thoughts where it's like, okay, you're getting older, so you have to be more independent and do all this on your own. But, we're going to put all these restrictions.
Right. Right. It's like, what? Like, that's confusing. Yeah. Hmm.
And part of your book too, you talk about how parents need to have like open, honest communication with, boundaries
Yeah.
and family expectations.
Yes. Yes.
Can you explain why that's so important, for the teen.
Yes, yes. So again, like just to kind of echo what you're saying, I think a lot of parents go into this with a, very positive mindset. They're coming from a good place. So I want to also preface this a lot of my work with the teen that when they do have parents who are very strict and set these restrictions, limitations of, not saying that it's okay, but helping the teen understand that the parents are protective, that they love them, that it's coming from a place where they care. It's not just them like trying to be mean, and that they're doing the best that they can. They're doing what they think will help. And again, it's a scary and different world out there, so it's understandable. But with the parents, again, like I come from that place too of actually restricting just such a disservice. Again, of course, there are very unique situations where sure it is appropriate. So I always just like to include that in here. This is not kind of a one size fits all statement, but generally speaking, I think, like you said, Courtney, it's first of all, confusing for the teen. It's like, well, you want me to be independent, you want me to grow into adult, but then you're still kind of treating me like a child. Like that's, can cause a lot of resentment and also a lot of internal conflict, a lot of anxiety of like, well, like, who am I? What, like, how am I supposed to navigate the world? Like, is the world safe? Is it not safe? Like, can I make these decisions for myself? Can I not? It's scary and confusing. Boundaries, on the other hand, are appropriate. So, and this is where we use the social media example here of a parent saying nope, you can't use social media, I'm going on there and I'm going to remove all of this and I'm going to go and monitor who you follow and what you follow and I'm the one that's going to look through all your messages. Like, no, not, I don't think that's really going to be helpful. Like I said, maybe there are certain emergency situations where, okay. On the other hand, of like a boundary of it's important to me, like the parent saying to their teen, it's important to me that we at least modify how you use social media. Like, let's talk about, even if you want to keep all your followers on there, even if you want to go on as much as you go on, can we integrate some positive pages that you follow on there? Are there some communities on there that inspire you creatively or artistically, or like, can we kind of sprinkle some of those in there too? Because not all social media is bad. There are pages there that are really positive and are actually very empowering and supportive. And I mean, we know we're professionals in here, that there are plenty of amazing professionals who post on social media, coping skills and, meditation strategies and mindfulness techniques and, and inspiring quotes. And that can, like, why do we have to limit a teen's, ability to look at that? Sure, a teen is going to be, less inclined to go and follow those pages versus like their friends at school. Let's be real. But it's appropriate if a parent says like, can we do something like that? Like, can we integrate something else? Or can we remove certain things from Instagram? So if like, I don't know, like random examples, like let's say that there is a social situation that's causing a teenager a ton of stress, can the teenager just temporarily mute those friends on Instagram so they're not seeing their posts? And the muting option doesn't alert the other friends that the person's unfollowing them or blocking them or what have you, but can we make some kind of tweaks and modifications, which ultimately can be very helpful for the teen? It might just be more subtle, and that can be challenging for parents, to be like, is this enough? Am I doing enough? Are they still struggling? Do I need to take more drastic measures? Oftentimes, no. Again, not a one size fits all statement, but like oftentimes even just these tweaks are really helpful for the teen.
I think the point you made too is when the parent and the teen is, when they're communicating and doing things together,
Yes.
that's huge. So it's like, oh, let me see, your social media or what, accounts you're following, or,
Mhm.
if you're anxious, what was posted, about you, or, what was that concern? Because when you do it together too, then it's not this like secretive thing. And it
Mhm.
opens up that honest, communication. And I want to go back a little bit to like the active listening.
Right.
To listening to a book the other day that was talking about like empathy and understanding and active listening, and how people, I mean, it's a pretty popular term now, but only I think like 10% of the population actually does it correctly.
Right. Right.
So what are some of the tips that, we could bring to parents, or if parents are here themselves, that
Mhm.
how do you start that active listening, very like specific things. Because sometimes too, I find when I'm working with parents, we assume because they're older, than the
Mhm.
teen, that they know these things.
Right.
They don't. And sometimes when we, provide that psychoeducation, they're like,
Sure.
"Oh, I didn't realize that, I thought to, be a quote unquote good parent, I had to tell my kid, they could only be on social media for 2 hours a day or whatever." And when
Right.
they realize the why behind it, it's like, "Oh, okay, I understand more." So
Right.
what would be some of those really specific strategies and skills they could take with them?
Well, first of all, for parents to remember that active listening is not the time to provide solutions or fix. So just to go in with that mentality of that, like, this isn't the time and place for that. Again, unless it's an emergency or something comes up, different story. But to go in, which is with that mentality of like, if I leave this conversation knowing that like there still isn't a solution, that's okay. That's totally, totally fine. Um, I usually recommend, I know I mentioned this before, but if someone is really struggling or this is kind of their first time going into it with that and want to actively listening, avoid the yes or no questions because that just closes it down. So, are you anxious? No. Okay. Like where the conversation just gone. And asking kind of follow-up questions again, like for clinicians, we're sort of like, oh yeah, this is kind of like our bread and butter here. But I'd love to learn a little bit more about that. I appreciate you sharing that with me. Um, I would love to learn more. I would love to hear more. What was that like for you when you felt that way? Can also ask some questions of what helped you during this? What do you feel might benefit you during this? Of really more of these like curious learning questions. So like those also are kind of key words that I, remind parents about is like active listening is curious and inquisitive, where you want to learn more, like almost collecting kind of information and just seeking to understand. So those are like I guess the kind of like the background sort of mentality I have, but the avoiding yes or no, asking the open-ended questions. Active listening, you can also kind of repeat what you're hearing again, like not to use too much like, kind of therapist tricks, but of like, oh, I'm hearing you say that you were really anxious before your math test. What was that like for you? The teen then knows that you're listening, you're repeating what they said, and maybe even using the teen's own words. So if the teen's like, I was totally freaking out before my math test, the parent isn't going to say like, it sounds like you were really, like struggling and overwhelmed. Say like, I'm hearing you say you were totally freaking out. Like use the teen's language. It might feel weird for the parent though. That's what I keep reminding the parent, that it might feel like you are speaking a different language, that you're communicating in a way that maybe doesn't feel quite as serious to you, but it's okay. That actually helps the teen open up
Mhm.
more.
Right. And I think with the active listening, it's just by nature. It's like, okay, you give us the information, we want to fix it. And
Right.
sometimes I've told the teen to say, okay, you have to tell, because sometimes they do want a solution. So I said, tell your parents either I just want to vent and I just
Right.
want to listen, or I want your, suggestions on.
Right.
But it is true. When I was listening to the book, it said, um, if you're having a conversation with somebody and in your head, though, you're already planning on how to respond, not
Mhm.
really active listening.
Right. Right.
But I'm never active listening then. Like I keep always thinking like, oh, how am I going to respond or how am I going to answer? But yeah, truly, if you're just listening because you, like you said, you just want to gain that understanding of what that person is going through and feeling,
Yeah.
like that's huge. And a lot of times teens will say, I don't, I just wanted my parents to understand.
Yes.
They didn't
Yes.
fix anything because sometimes you can't fix the situation. But if
Yeah.
you know that they can talk to you about it and just saying
Mhm.
those non-judgmental and empathetic words, like, wow, that must be really hard for you.
Yeah.
It's going to
Yeah.
make a huge difference.
Yeah. And what's funny is that's actually treating them more like an adult. So even if it feels like, okay, I'm communicating or using this kind of like language of a teen, like less of an adult, you're treating them more like an adult, because kids often do need the solutions. They need the parents to kind of swoop in and help them. Like children, they need that. They don't have the skills, again, blanket statement, but take that with a grain of salt. But adults, most times like we like to be listened to. We don't want to be told what to do all the time, and think of the teen, think of how often they are told what to do and are treated like like children, and they're going into adulthood. So it can feel upsetting to them to constantly be told what to do. Like they're always getting bossed around. I mean, think of even school, like all the stuff that they have to do that they don't want to do. So it's important at home that they feel that they're treated more like a young adult. And that can also give them the confidence as they emerge into adulthood. If a parent is always fixing and telling them what to do, what happens when they go to college or, when they move out? Like, how are they going to know
Right.
what to do? And again, like parents come from a really good place. I mean, this goes to kind of the sort of rescuing, enabling conversation, we mentioned earlier. But the constant fixing and providing solutions doesn't teach the teen how to take care of themselves too. Whereas like listening can be very empowering and help them realize like, wow, like I really am struggling. Maybe it is time for me to think of some ways that I can help myself, or I can ask my parent to help me, or we can come up with it together, versus like, this is what you need to do and do it.
Right. So two kind of questions though. So when if the teen, like a lot of times a client will come in and they have
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, high school kid with like colleges, tests, friends, um,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of that perfectionist attitude and they want to do really, they will
Mm-hmm.
say, no one else is putting pressure on me but myself. So
Mm-hmm.
how do we help them? And then the other part is how do we help them if the parent is the one with more of the anxiety and putting more of the stress on them?
Right, right. And that's something I encourage a lot of parents to look into, when, again, kind of separate topic, but, when I have a parent that comes in and says, like, hey, my teen is really struggling and they're totally resistant to any help, that's where I really encourage the parent, to really look into themselves and see if there are things that they can do, are they feeling anxious? Are they feeling overwhelmed? Is the teen kind of modeling after them, and encouraging them to kind of take care of themselves and get their own support. So oftentimes, again, not all parents, and a lot of times parents don't even realize this, that it's, they have their own stuff that they're bringing into the relationship, and that there's a lot of pressure at home. And really, my work with the teen, whether it's school, private practice, is really encouraging and helping the teen build their own self-esteem here. So that's kind of like the bulk of my work with the teen, and teaching them, and look, like, it takes time, that like it is okay for them to make mistakes. It is okay for them to be imperfect. And also those opportunities, those kind of mistakes, like when they make a mistake, are opportunities or they're lessons or ways to kind of build resilience, but encouraging the teen that like it's not going to feel good when they do that, that it's going to take time. And as a clinician, it's holding that space for them and being there for them when they kind of scrape their knees, and providing that kind of outlet and support. And, as we know as clinicians, is meeting them where they're at, and knowing that it's going to take time. Like I mean, I think with any client, but particularly with a teen, it's not that they're going to come say, I put so much pressure on myself and I'm so stressed out and I'm really anxious. It all comes from me, and then we do a couple sessions, then it's gone. Do you know what I mean? It's a lifelong journey. So sometimes even if it's like, like 1% change for the better, like that's wonderful. And I encourage parents to remember that too.
So we have a question. It's from
Yeah.
Kim. And I think, Kim, if you're comfortable, if you want to unmute and ask, because I think it went back to what we were talking about before, but it says one of our challenges we face, parents rely and depend on students to respond to them while they're in school throughout the day. Assuming that might be with phone use, but I'm not
I'm
sure.
gonna ask, is that with
Yeah,
phone?
yeah, it is with the phone because you're talking about, giving the students to learn to be responsible, and
Mm-hmm.
then, the appropriate time to use the phone. And so I know that's a big step for us here at our school, because currently our policy says that, you cannot have a phone, it has to remain in your locker. And
Hmm.
so we have a lot of pushback, and the fight is parents are, what if I can't get a hold of them? What if there's a
Hmm.
like a intruder, or there's an emergency and I can't get a hold of my kid? And so it's a lot of stressors that I think the parents are, and they rely on their kid to respond,
Hmm.
actively. So then they're having that phone constantly too. So what are
Yeah.
some good tips, I guess, to how to start with, um, when we try to, I guess, me here at the school, um, I know it's working with the parent to have them come on board to understand
Yeah.
and to be comfortable.
Yeah.
But if they're already dealing with some PTSD or other mental health issues, what is our boundaries, I guess, for that as well? Because then their issues and things are coming into the school, and that's what's creating some issues at our school. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, yeah, no, and trust me, I hear you. There are times where, when I was working at school as a counselor, and I'm like, if these parents are making it a little more challenging, we'll put it that way, where it's like kind of they're bringing their own anxieties, and kind of pushing back on the school policies. And again, it's understandable. Like, look at what we see on the news all the time about, that there's violence in schools and shootings in schools, and it's like, we're living in a very turbulent world. So it's understandable that a lot of parents have, heightened stress. And I definitely, when I was working with parents like this at the school, I really do. I reflect that back to them, of having that empathy and compassion, that it's understandable to be very nervous and anxious about this, and then, just setting that really firm boundary of, if this is a no phone school, that is our protocol, as challenging as it is, but, and again, this is where I think it depends obviously on the protocols of your school, but of letting them know that if there ever, was an emergency, these are the exact steps that we would take, and this is how you would hear from us, and we would be reaching out, and that kind of, not to say like, we kind of have it under control, but of really kind of outlining what that might even look like. I wonder if that might help the parent, but I feel for you, Kim, because I know that sometimes it's almost like another barrier that you have when you're trying to kind of help the student, and the parents are kind of going against what you're saying here.
And I think too, just to add to that, I think working in a school, like Sophia was saying, does add a whole nother layer because working with the student, the parent, and the school district
Yes, yes,
don't all align. And it
right,
can be really tough. But I think, Kim, your question brings up too, trying to differentiate between, is it the child's anxiety or the parent's anxiety?
right.
I
mm-hmm.
have a quick little story. I was working with this teen, actually, she was in college at the time, for years. High, high anxiety. The mom came in every session, which was fine if that's what made her comfortable. But she would
Mhm.
go out like with friends or her boyfriend and then always have to come home because she was so anxious. We couldn't figure out really if there was trauma or what was going on. Then once they told me the story that my client was saying, I got really, really anxious, so I had to leave. They were in the city. So my boyfriend, left me on the street and went to go get the car. And the mom goes, "What? He left you all alone on the street by yourself?" And in my head, it's not funny, but in my head, I was like, "Oh my gosh, we're dealing with the mom's anxiety.
Of
Like,
course, of
what was
course.
going on?" So I
Mhm.
think, at the beginning when we're doing our psycho ed too, it's like, okay, we need to differentiate. And a lot of times it runs in families, right? And it's even modeling that anxiety. But
Right.
working with, okay, so you're feeling this way because of this, and your child's feeling this way because of this, and trying to come to an understanding, because you're right, Kim, a lot of times students and teens take on their parents' anxiety.
Hmm.
They might say, no, it's not, I don't feel like, it's not my mom saying I have to text her, but I feel like I do, when really it's like, that's not helping, the situation at all.
Right. Right. And that's a big part of the kind of, latter half of my book, is like a very nice, gentle way of encouraging parents to really look into themselves. That like, how are they living their life? Like what kind of energy are they putting out there? Are they running around stressed all the time that their teen sees that? Or are they super anxious and super fearful? And again, it's understandable to be fearful with, kind of the state of our world and the news all the time. And again, life has its own stressors, but like what could our teen be picking up on? Like what is the teen seeing as sort of like my kind of baseline here, and just encouraging parents to really look into themselves and seeing the areas that they could improve upon. Because like no one is perfect, of course, and it's important for parents to know that like they still have their work to do, and it's stressful being a parent, and that the support will help them and ultimately help their teen.
So sometimes too, I think what's helpful is if one person in the family has anxiety, I think the whole family could benefit from certain like daily habits or
Right.
routines that could help.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
and I know in your book you talk about this a little bit too, but Sophia, if you could put together like a very basic, like family treatment plan, what would those things be? What would, make up that treatment plan for everybody?
Every single one in therapy. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, that would be nice, right? So really, let's say I have a teen that comes to see me for therapy. We work through ways for the teen, like if I'm doing the individual therapy with the teen, to build self-esteem. Of course, develop kind of the coping skills and some, emotional regulation techniques and gather some tools to kind of help them on the immediate day to day. Okay, you're feeling anxious for your math test. What can we do? What skills can we employ? Right before. But then let's also do kind of like the under the surface work. Like let's talk about ways that you can build your self-esteem, that you can feel more confident, that it's okay to go, and even if you bomb that math test, that like you're going to be okay, that it doesn't mean anything about you. So that's really the work that I would be doing with the teen, with the family. And typically like for me personally, what I do is I will refer the teen and their parents out to a separate family therapist. I talk about this in the book, and then, have them sign the release of information so we can communicate and collaborate. If I have a parent come in, it's usually almost as like a guest, that they kind of come to the teen's therapy, and obviously we talked about it before, but I would really encourage the parent on their own to really look into themselves, like what we were talking about, of doing that internal work of looking like, hey, what are my own anxieties? What's my energy I'm bringing into this? What word choice, what do I employ on a daily basis? Like what language do I use with my teen? What tone of voice do I use with my teen? So that's for them to, work on kind of on their own. And then in terms of the family work is ways for the teen to feel listened to, and for the parent to also be, kind of more communicative with the teen of, hey, when I'm accidentally fixing or providing a solution, how can you communicate with me so I know that that's time to actively listen? How can I know when I'm supporting you, for the two of them, or two of them, three of them, however many, to really get on the same page with that, of like, how can we communicate? How can we support each other through
Mhm.
this?
Yeah, and I think sometimes you can do things as a family that your teen might not even know, would help anxiety. So maybe it's like, the group exercise or making sure everybody, is eating healthy, going to
Sure.
bed, things like that that would just kind of help with overall. But also if other people have questions, they can put it in the chat now because we have about 10 minutes left. But also to Kim's point too. I was thinking about sometimes, when we feel anxious, it's because we don't have a lot of control over things. And
Sure.
phone policy, right? It might be a good idea to even have a conversation with the student saying, okay, what are the benefits of this? How could it be distracting? And really kind of look at it and see, okay, what could be, the best case scenario for everybody involved. And I know
Right.
I don't know if it's a school policy. I know in my state now it's actually a law that they can't have their phone, so it's a little bit harder to change. But still, even with that, it's kind of modeling for the anxious teen, like, okay, if we're feeling a certain way, what do we have control over? What can we do about it? Or how do we make that situation potentially better for
Hmm.
us?
Hmm.
And again, it might not completely change the situation, but at least they feel, again, that autonomy and
Hmm.
that, that what, their view matters and okay, what can I do, about it,
Mhm.
might help. But sometimes our hands are tied more than others, unfortunately.
Right, definitely. No, it's frustrating for sure, and again, like, I feel for the clinicians, and I've been there, when it's like, you're working so hard with this teen, with the student, and then it's like this major roadblock of, kind of the parent that's maybe like contributing to it, whether they realize it or
Mm.
not. And it's tough. And, in a school too, again, every school has different kind of protocols and policies where it's like, what you can talk to the parent and do some kind of coaching over the phone, but it's not like you're going to be doing like family therapy in the school and then, you can refer out, but will they follow up? So like it's kind of this whole sort of web. So that's why I'm like, kind of do what we can with the skills and the resources we have available for us.
Good.
Mhm.
All right, so we have a couple more minutes, and just a reminder that there's a 1 hour continuing ed course developed by Sophia on this topic. And for a limited time, if you go to Hatherley, it's actually a free course, and you can sign up in the chat. It has the link. Also, next month, we are going to be meeting October 16th, again at 11 a.m., and it's about understanding autoimmune diseases. So, Sophia, thank you again for being here. And is there any last takeaway that you would want parents or clinicians to get from your book?
Yeah. So really my hope for the book is to give people hope, and know that it's never a lost cause and that there's always, opportunity and space to heal and to improve, gather more skills, more tools, more resources. I also encourage people to read a variety of different books, go to workshops, go to seminars, talk to a lot of different professionals that, again, it's not a one size fits all. So the more that people know about this topic, the better, and what we can do versus just knowing like this is a problem. There's a lot of conversation about that of like teen anxiety is really bad, but like we really benefit from knowing how we can help and what we can do. And I will say that, I can put my email or website in the chat too. If anyone does have any more questions, or anything kind of pops up for them later, they can reach out to me as well. And I'm always happy to chat. So I'll put that in right now. Yeah.
Perfect.
And yeah, thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you for your conversation, and I hope everybody picks up your book when it's out.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Courtney. I appreciate it. And thank you all for coming.